saw this picture on Twitter, asking who would win with every power in their series. The funny thing is, people didn't talk about Tanjiro at all, and it's kind of unfair to Gon because they skipped over him too. He'd be pretty strong, but most of the focus was on Deku and Yuji. Ignoring the disrespect to Gon, which of these two would win? Deku with every quirk, or Yuji with every curse technique and domain? This will have heavy spoilers for both series, including Modulo. To start off, let's set some ground rules for the fight. 1. They fight alone in an empty city. 2. Deku could see curses and Shinigami and be affected by domains. 3. They can't copy abilities from each other. Both will have copying powers here, and we're not going to say the copy quirk will copy curse techniques and vice versa. Number 4. Both are bloodlusted. Number 5. Only known abilities are allowed. We're not making hypotheticals up here. Number 6. It's deathmatch, which is why they're bloodlusted. And finally, they can control all of their powers and are aware of all the powers that they have, with full mastery. Otherwise, it's a pointless discussion because they might just die from being overloaded from the start, and they wouldn't know everything they could tap into. So I've already made a video scaling Deku with every quirk, and we'll focus more on Yuji here, but I need to make some additions to Deku as well. But let's begin with Yuji. The picture shows JJK Yuji, but we'll use both the characters at their peaks. Since we don't really know how strong adult Deku is, let's use War Arc Deku and then Modulo Yuji, even though we don't really know too much about him. As of the time of recording, we've only seen him do a few feats so far in that manga, so I'm going to be mostly basing it off of that. And that Yuji is already pretty strong as is. His casual dismantles are causing destruction akin to what Sukuna and Gojo's fight caused. With nearly 70 years of experience and multiple abilities already, here's what he's going to start with. At absolute baseline, like bare minimum, Yuji will be a large city level character with relativistic speeds. And remember, this is just based off of like those first feats he's ever shown in that story. By the time this video comes out, he might show even better feats. On top of that power, he obviously has Cleave and Dismantle, he has very high level blood manipulation, poisonous blood that could easily incapacitate you, though that wouldn't affect Deku who could shoot out all of his blood. He has regeneration through reverse curse technique. He could do black flashes basically on command. He could perceive souls, attack souls, and be resistant to soul attacks. And all around, he's just a really skilled fighter. He's got a really good skill set, but he's going to get a lot more here. What are the biggest things he gets? Well, to start off with, he's obviously going to have Limitless. The 6 Eyes is needed to really utilize this, and while the 6 Eyes isn't really a technique on its own, considering how necessary it is for that technique to work, and the fact that occasionally Limitless users will be born with that anyways, let's just give Yuji this as well and assume that he's going to have access to all of Gojo's powers. That might make it seem like I'm giving him extra things, but without that, he's losing one of the biggest powers he can use. Not to mention, Deku's going to be getting like 9 billion powers here, so I think this is kind of fair. Yuji would have hundreds of powers from Earth, but also however many Sumerian techniques exist. Some of the big powers he gets are Limitless with the powers of infinity, Dabra's curse technique, Kashimo's curse technique, projection sorcery, jackpot, idle transfiguration, curse speech, comedian, ratio, chaos and harmony, construction, boogie woogie, curse spirit manipulation, various summoning techniques like 10 shadows and Ino's beast, inverse, even though this is going to have limits, the seance technique, multiple elemental curse techniques like ice, fire, water, earth, and nature manipulation, paralysis from Ranta Zenin, as well as the poison blood that he has, love rendezvous, even though this isn't really too major considering infinity does it better, judge man, explosive body parts combined with reverse curse technique, sky manipulation, G war staff which grants him future sight, Star Rage, and Solo Forbidden Arena for buffing himself. There's also Maharaga, but he wouldn't get that adaptation for himself, he would still have to summon Maharaga and do that. But that doesn't really matter because he has access to that anyways. Not to mention, he could use Curse Spirit Manipulation to summon curses with abilities like Vengeful Spirits, the Inventory Curse, the Smallpox Deity, Ganesha, which can remove any obstacles and defy concepts, etc. And of course, these could all be combined into Uzumaki. However, he could either summon the spirits or use their curse technique once before it depletes. So, on top of the curse techniques he has access to these one-time moves, unless he wants to summon spirits to fight alongside him. Some of his best domains include, but aren't limited to, Unlimited Void, Malevolent Shrine, Time Cell Moon Palace, Chimera Shadow Garden, Deadly Sentencing, Idle Death Gamble, Threefold Affliction, and of course, his own domain, which, as of recording, is still unnamed. As for power, it is a bit hard to scale him. Speed-wise, he's undeniably light speed at minimum, thanks to Dabra's technique. Though it is worth noting, that's where Dabra caps out too. He's the fastest and can't even really utilize full light speed, but I feel like Yuji with all these powers could at least handle that here. If not a little more, so let's place him at like a low faster than light, maybe a few times light speed at best, considering the other buffs he could stack on top of it. As for power, it's kind of tough to say because he's not going to have a bunch of strength enhancement techniques like Deku would. His strongest attack would be Yoruzu's True Sphere, which is technically universal in power, so that's pretty huge. There's also Yuki's Black Hole, which is a suicide attack of planetary scale. But with regular power, it's just Prime Yuji strength, and basically using the 6 eyes to cheat endless curse energy. Since it's so hard to scale him, especially at the time of recording, I'll make a random guesstimate here. Let's say like small country level with his normal attacks. Again, it's really tough to judge because there's not a bunch of basic multipliers like Dragon Ball, for example, or many feats for Prime Yuji in general. He'd be untouchable with Infinity. He can manipulate mass with Star Rage. Even though this isn't a base technique of Sukuna, he could use the world-cutting slash to slice reality. He could use Binding Vows, and buff himself in multiple other ways. He also has multiple forms of teleportation, both from Gojo and Boogie Woogie, for example. He can create Shinigami and curse spirits to help him. He could summon Maharaga, etc. Yuji has a ton of varied hacks that he could utilize. Comedian's probably one of the biggest ones, but it's not really unlimited like some people think. Sure, the concept of the power is broken, but it's specifically based on what Yuji finds funny. He definitely doesn't have the same sense of humor as Takaba, but also, we don't really know what his sense of humor is like. We kind of have an understanding of it, but not enough to actually cover this ability here. It's gonna be pretty tough. Don't get me wrong, it still has insane potential, but Yuji can't force himself to find something funny or warp reality with absolutely no limits. That's on top of the fact that we don't even know the upper limits of this ability, but it is capable of some pretty crazy stuff, both offensive and defensive. There's also Judge Man from Higuruma, which would give him an insta-kill weapon too, but I wonder if this would even work on Deku at all. Now, of course, the domain would affect him, but whose laws would it base it on? Would it base it on the laws of wherever they fight? Would it be based on the laws of late 21st century Japan? Or would it be based on the hero laws of the 22nd century Japan and My Hero Academia? If it's based on that, Deku has broken the law a few times by acting on his own, but nothing severe, and the kills he's done were pretty much legal. If it's based on Yuji's laws, maybe Deku would be tried for things like assault, destruction of property, or potentially even murder, but I don't think Deku has done anything severe enough to warrant a death sentence. So if Judge Man doesn't grant the death penalty, it's pretty much useless here because usually it just takes away the cursed tools and techniques of other people. Or their cursed energy, which would just buff Deku if anything, because then he's immune to domains. Also, unfortunately for Yuji, he gets none of Maki's benefits with her lack of a cursed technique, and he doesn't have Rika for storage. She's connected to Yuta's cursed technique, but is specific to the ring and isn't really a cursed technique on her own. Though she'd only be storage for him anyways, and he wouldn't really need that. Speaking of the ring though, he doesn't have any cursed tools or anything, as those aren't techniques, but most won't even have a use here. And, of course, Yuta's copy technique and his domain are pretty useless since he already has every cursed technique, and he can't copy quirks. And stuff like Angel's technique that's broken in the series is kind of useless here too, against someone that's not using cursed abilities. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to drop a like and some hype points on the video. It helps the channel out a lot by boosting this video to other people that might be interested in it. Plus, I make videos like this all the time, so subscribe if you'd like. Anyways, on to Deku now. If you want in-depth scaling of Deku, I'd suggest watching that last video I made about him. I'll link it above. But in that video, we scaled Deku insanely high. I still think I was conservative, but you can get him to solar system level with all the quirks he has. By the way, he has over 8.8 billion quirks based on our calculations. But at low ball, we got him to large planetary level, and solar system was pretty much the mid ball. And his speeds would be massively faster than light. Over there, I estimated it to be 285,000 times the speed of light. So with stats alone, he's greatly outmatching Yuji. What about abilities though? What are his best quirks? Well, let's give a short list here. Obviously One for All and All for One. He's going to have all the quirks of the previous One for All users, which he already had in canon. He's going to have New Order. He'll have Overhaul and an Awakened Decay. He'll have Rewind. He'll have Permeation. There's Creation, which could be really cracked with everything he has. And then there's Twice, which allows him to clone himself a bunch. Though, in that last video, I only used quirks from the main story and Vigilantes. Again, there's a more detailed breakdown of the powers that he has there, although I will touch upon them here when the fight starts. But I didn't cover one of the spin-offs that's called My Hero Academia Smash. There is a stupidly broken quirk over there. It's called Isekai, and it's exactly what it sounds like. This quirk literally rewrote the entire timeline of the story, and isekai'd it. So that's a huge addition. To be fair, that quirk isn't canon, but the original image doesn't specify canon stuff or not. Because it's basically an insta-win quirk, and it's also not canon, let's focus on everything else first, but keep that in mind. If we truly include every official quirk, canon or not, that alone lets him win here. I made a tweet about this mentioning how many quirks he would have, and I have some things to make clear. First of all, having 8.8 billion quirks won't turn him into a giant monster, at least in the context of this scenario. But even disregarding this context, All for One would let him control which quirks get activated and which don't. So all those heteromorph quirks won't deform him into a giant meat puppet. I also saw people saying that most of the quirks are useless, and yeah, that's kind of fair, there are a lot of useless quirks. But let's say only 10% of his quirks are useful, which is very conservative. That's still 880 million useful powers. Hell, even if only 0.01% of quirks are useful, that's 880,000 useful abilities. And this is an advantage for Deku too. He definitely would get useless or detrimental quirks, but those become weapons for him. He could forcibly pass these quirks on with All For One. So any negative quirk won't hurt him, only whoever he decides to give it to. And with Deku being bloodlust in the scenario, doing anything to kill his opponent, it's a possibility, even though it's something he definitely wouldn't do in character. Also, even with useless quirks, those combined can make for something useful. One For All started out as 2 useless quirks, for example. It's a combination of Quirk Bestowal and Power Stock. Quirk Bestowal was pretty much useless before without having another quirk at your side. Bakugo also has a pretty insane quirk, and it's a combo of 2 useless quirks. Float on its own isn't very useful, but combined with One For All, Shimura and Deku made use of it for flight, especially Deku having other quirks to utilize it alongside too. You see what I mean? If you're really creative, weak quirk could be really useful, and even normally useless quirk could be helpful too, if they combine with the right other quirks. Not to mention, strong quirks together will have the same effect. Look, just as a really easy example, Gear Shift combined with Explosion. Deku can take explosive beads of sweat and launch them with Gear Shift, basically turning him into a walking nuke launcher, and that's just the combination of 2 quirks. Even with the really low estimate of 880,000 good quirks, do you know how many insane combos work there? Even if a lot of them are redundant or duplicates of each other. Like, even if he only had like 10,000 quirks that were unique and useful, that would give him millions upon millions of unique combinations, even with just that. And as mentioned in that Deku video too, all of his quirks would be hugely boosted. There's a reason that One For All was so coveted. Imagine having that alongside various other enhancement and stockpiling quirks, on top of whatever other quirk he has, due to the very nature of One For All. Now, we're going under the assumption here that Deku knows how to use all of his quirks, but let's assume that he doesn't. He doesn't know how to use all of them, and he doesn't know all the different billions of quirks he has. All For One operated by getting simple, strong, flashy quirks. Anything with a learning curve would be pretty useless, just like it was for All For One. He avoided those because there was no point training countless quirks when he could steal just straightforward ones. But Deku would know any quirks he retrieved from pro heroes and friends since he was already a nerd who took notes on that type of stuff. Plus, he's really good at strategizing with multiple quirks anyways, so even assuming he doesn't know how to use all of his powers, just for the sake of argument here, he'd know about all the quirks that he knows from pros, all the quirks that he knows from classmates, quirks that he knows from villains he fought, his own quirks, and simple quirks that don't have learning curves. And we're not doing that here. We're assuming that he knows how to use every power, just like we're doing for Yuji. Either way, Deku is at an advantage. In sheer numbers alone and knowledge of other quirks too, Deku's outmatching him here. Deku also has a ton of great quirks that help him with support, for example, like Search, which isn't just limited to locating quirks, it locates weaknesses. He also has soul manipulation and resistance to that too. All For One, Shigaraki, and Deku all have this with how their quirks work. So it's funny because Deku already had this kind of anyways. They have awareness of souls and ways to protect them. So overall, even just skimming over his abilities, it kind of seems like it's in his favor, but let's go to the actual fight. First, Deku needs to overcome Infinity, while Yuji needs to try and kill Deku in general. If Yuji deploys Maharaga, Deku would just need to one-shot him. But the good thing for Deku is, that's not even really a necessity here. Maharaga can only adapt to one thing at a time. Deku has billions of powers. There is no way Maharaga is going to adapt to all of that. If Deku doesn't just one-shot him right away, once he figures out how Maharaga works, he's fine. Not to mention, Deku has multiple bad quirks he could use to pass on to others, which also act as weapons here. Though this wouldn't really matter for someone like Maharaga who isn't a person, as well as any spirits or Shinigami that Yuji summons. But if he gets his hands on Yuji, this is an option. A good strategy for Deku is a New Order Dead Man's Trigger. This is something that's within reason and could probably work. Like, Deku makes a rule for himself. Like, right off the bat, he says, if I die, I will instantly get rewound. Even if he can only have 2 rules active at once, that's fine. That's a great rule to have. Also, knowing how strategic Deku is, I'm sure he'd also create a twice clone as a backup, or a few. This will prevent him from dying fully, and this could help against domains later. Okay, but let's talk about Infinity for a bit. How could Deku even pass that? Well, a few things come to mind for me. He's going to have various types of telekinetic quirks, different types of warping quirks like Kurogiri's, and spatial manipulation quirks too. Also, any quirk that works remotely can also bypass this. If Yuji happens to be standing on the ground, Decay will be able to reach him, though if he's airborne, this is kind of irrelevant. But for example, for the remote quirks, All For One has a quirk that he uses to kill Yoichi, and also he uses it against Hawks. When he does it, he twists his hand, and the target gets twisted in the exact same way, and it looks to be some sort of spatial manipulation. At the very least, he's doing it from a distance without touching them, and it affects them directly. There's no reason to think this wouldn't bypass Infinity, though to be fair, we don't know much about how this quirk works. But from what I'm mentioning, those are just quirks we know. I'm not making up any hypothetical quirks there. There are various quirks of those nature. Or, even easier, Yuji could be warped into space. Sure, Yuji has teleportation of his own and can warp back to Earth, but this would be insta-kill. On the other hand, if Yuji tried to do the same to Deku and warp him to space, like by throwing a rock into space coated with cursed energy and then using Boogie Woogie for it, that wouldn't affect Deku. With all the types of regeneration he has, as well as all the other enhancements he has too, even being in space probably wouldn't kill him right away. Or at all. Plus, another way to get around Infinity is Shinzo's mind control. It could be a really busted tool here, because Yuji's not going to expect it. If he happens to fall into Deku's trap, then it's game over. With the mind control, he could just have him stop fighting completely, or end the fight some other way. Even the Fly Swatter quirk from Koichi's mom works. Plus, this might be a long shot, but a couple other ways he has around it are by using New Order rules, or potentially even permeation, though that probably wouldn't affect his cursed energy, and he still gets blocked by Infinity because of that. Plus, he could forcibly transfer quirks to Yuji in a way so violent that it will break his soul. And it doesn't specifically have to be All For One. He has so many different quirks within him that just a barrage of quirks that he remotely launches can get through Infinity, and that's that. Okay, what about Unlimited Void? Now, I already mentioned the New Order kill switch or the twice backups. These would be good counters to it. Of course, he wouldn't preemptively know about the domains and these types of powers. However, this is just a smart strategy in general. Hidden twice clones that act as backups and New Order quick saves are pretty basic strategies to cover his ass. Deku is already smart and strategic as is, so he'd probably do this by default. Not to mention, his intelligence is greatly increased with high specs, so he might have other better strategies beyond these simple ones, because these are pretty likely and simple strategies. Deku will also have a ton of vestiges, so he might have a way to use a huge collective consciousness to help him here. Considering All For One's awareness of souls and the ability to even have others take the brunt of an attack, Deku could redirect souls to protect him. Or, on top of that, let's say Yuji succeeds and Deku goes into a catatonic state from this attack and just goes brain dead. Just as All For One took over Shigaraki's body, one of the 8.8 billion vestiges of Deku might be able to take over there. Also, if he is conscious, he's strong enough to break out of the domain. He's also got multiple forms of instinctive action and body control. And with his speed, he can completely outpace the domain anyways. So he's got multiple ways to counter it, and probably more than the ones that I just mentioned. And that's if he even gets caught by the domain in the first place and stays in it long enough to be affected, because even if the domain does hit him, Deku is so fast and so strong that he could just get away in time, or break free. Yuji's hacks are probably not enough here. Not only does Deku counter them, but he basically can do all the same stuff. People also might bring up the fact that slash attacks can scale to durability, but they can increase, but there's nowhere that says that there's no upper limit. Assuming that they could be buffed to like solar system level is just kind of fallacious. World-cutting slash? Deku has multiple forms of regen and precognition. Comedian? It's only what Yuji finds funny, and Deku can more freely warp reality with New Order. Idle transfiguration? Overhaul counters that and does it better, since it works on non-living stuff too. Infinity? Bypassed multiple ways. Regeneration from Jackpot. It's nice for energy, even though it's redundant with the 6 eyes, but regen doesn't matter if his brain is fully destroyed in one shot. One other power I didn't mention earlier is Cursed Speech. Against someone with no protections against cursed energy, this one could be a big issue, but emphasis on could. With near limitless cursed energy, alongside reverse curse technique to regenerate his throat, Cursed Speech will be way more usable for Yuji. The only thing is, we said we're limiting it to the powers that actually exist, and we don't know the upper limits of what it's capable of. We could be more hypothetical with something like New Order that has shown more variety, and clearly has higher limits, but sadly, Inumaki and Yuta haven't shown off much with Cursed Speech. But a big downside here is that it's based on cursed energy output, so even though Yuji doesn't have to worry about depleting cursed energy, I think it's going to be the same issue that I mentioned with Cleave, where it simply doesn't have the destructive power to overpower Deku. Like, if he told Deku to explode, the amount of cursed energy in his speech isn't enough to destroy someone with that level of durability. It would probably be good for status effects rather than attacking, if anything. But it's not an insta-win button. What about soul attacks? Deku has those too, and he can also directly protect his soul, as well as having multiple others a part of him. Direct hits? Domains? Doesn't matter when you can clone yourself and redirect soul attacks. Deku can also make himself intangible to protect his physical body, and can clone himself. Plus, while he doesn't necessarily have direct hits, he has his homing quirk from Snipe, so that could help too. Yuji's best shot is instantly popping an Unlimited Void, paralyzing Deku, then killing him in there, even though that's not guaranteed to work, but it's his best shot. The True Sphere in a domain would work too, but Deku wouldn't be immobilized in this domain unless Yuji somehow combines it with Unlimited Void, or uses his paralysis technique. However, if Deku has any capacity to move, he will. He can go after Yuji while making the sphere, or break out of the domain. The Search quirk will also let him see weaknesses, and combined with Danger Sense that tells him, hey, get out of here, this is how to do so. Yuki's Black Hole wouldn't even work either, since that was countered by an anti-gravity technique in canon. And Deku not only has multiple gravity-related quirks of his own, but he would also have a Black Hole quirk. Buffed by all the enhancements he has, he could probably make a comparable Black Hole, and avoid its effects. If Yuji fails to kill Deku with a domain, Deku will know that these things target the soul, and have surefire hits. That alone means he can counter it, and then Yuji's bag of tricks gets a lot smaller. However, one of the best things Yuji has here are binding vows. I feel like if he wants to win, he would need to rely on these heavily to buff himself. The best part is he has a lot of stuff that he could trade off, so if he wants to heavily buff an ability, he could simply do something like trading off an entire curse technique to do it. Again, we're not going to get too hypothetical in terms of what is and isn't possible with binding vows, but it is worth mentioning because making vows mid-battle while he figures out what he's up against could allow him to at least get the edge in some aspects. Trading off entire techniques could be huge, especially when he has so many to spare. This combined with targeted soul attacks that can attempt to separate quirks from Deku are what I think could be his best paths to victory. The issue is just too hypothetical, because it depends on what Yuji would give up, what buffs he'd want, the extent of what binding vows are capable of, and how Deku responds with one of his many powers. But even though we're not theorizing it, for what it's worth, I think these would actually be the key to victory for him, even if it is just a small chance. It's just that Yuji's win conditions are mostly hypothetical, while Deku has more things that are actually shown to be possible. Deku has everything Yuji has, even the blood manipulation. Yuji has a few win conditions, but they're so few and specific that it's unlikely to work. Deku, on the other hand, has so many counters to Yuji's powers, and he grossly overpowers him with stats by default. The only thing he doesn't overpower is the True Sphere, but any other attack from Yuji is below even Deku's low ball strength. And this is also ignoring the Isekai quirk again. So this isn't a no diff win for Deku, but it is a very, very low diff win. Meanwhile, for Yuji, a win isn't impossible, but it's like 99% chance that he's going to lose here. Let me know what you think below though. Was there anything I missed? Maybe next I can make a video about going with every Nen ability. I plan to anyways, but if you want another video like this, I also made one with Joseph Joestar having every stand, so be sure to check that out. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.